So I want to talk about the evolution of not just conceptual frameworks, but really just practice and methods. So in particular, let's say we think there is a certain method, let's say the use of pre-analysis plans in prospective research, prospectively designed studies. If we think those are useful and we think there's good conceptual reasons for us to be using pre-analysis plans, are they going to spread? Even if they're objectively useful, does that mean they're definitely going to spread? And what might encourage their spread? Like, how is this going to look? How is this going to play out? Kuhn makes this distinction between two types of periods in research. There's periods of normal science, and there's so-called episodes of scientific revolution. So periods of normal science are periods where most people would kind of agree on the model, they agree on the methods, and you're doing research to advance that agenda. And the contrast is between those periods and periods where there's a sharp change in paradigm. Or, you could think the analogy to this term is maybe a sharp change in the research methods used. And I would argue when you think about, say, the use of pre-analysis plans, at least in some narrow subfields like development economics, if we think of that as a pretty fundamental change in the nature of the research to pre-specify your hypotheses, I think it is a pretty big change. We're much more in a rapid shift point, say, around the use of that method in development economics, at least in this very narrow field. During periods of normal science, novelties that might be useful are often suppressed. If they challenge, conceptual frameworks that everyone's using, that everyone else is basing their research on, there's going to be a lot of insiders who have a stake in maintaining that model. Same thing with research methods. If a lot of people's careers and their research that they have in the field right now are based on certain methods, and you come along with a new method that really challenges the validity of their approach, which is certainly the case with some of the transparency approaches we've discussed this term, there's inevitably going to be resistance. So I think thinking about the history of science is very useful. When we think of our own field and the fact that there's a lot of resistance to new methods that seem so useful, this isn't the first time. This is how it always goes. So why are approaches eventually adopted? Well, he points to a couple things. First, they have to be useful. They have to solve a problem that's sort of a recognized problem. If they don't do that, they're really not going to be, even if they are interesting or conceptually attractive, if they're not solving a concrete problem, they're not going to be adopted, he says. The second critical point, and I want to emphasize this, it's pretty interesting. Really, the key thing to the spread of new tools intellectually, when you look at how new approaches have spread in academic fields and in scientific fields, has been through training the next generation. That's actually how new ideas spread. When the next generation is adopting a tool, it's going to become widespread. So the scholars who train lots of students, effectively, have a lot of say in the direction of the field. They have a disproportionate say in the direction of the field. So you're not just competing for the hearts and minds of your colleagues, you're sort of competing for the hearts and minds of your students. The only way change happens, and the only way you get a paradigm shift, this is Kuhn's famous contribution, it's coming up with that terminology, is through competition between segments of the intellectual community or the scholarly community. That's just how it goes. A good idea with predictive power that's useful isn't going to be sort of widely adopted without some sort of competition within the scholarly community.